Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Episode number 82 in this ongoing series. Many topics to cover tonight, so moving right along. 3i Atlas, I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about something I rarely talk about is politics. And but on the world scene here, nobody's really reporting this. A couple of people are getting close to the main topic. But 3i Atlas weighs into this heavily, and a lot of people, I've been reporting on this, and really not any place else. This past week, we exposed a disinformation hub, clearly being run by the CIA. This is a CIA front operation, and these people always appear to be, they put the front on of being little Johnny just working out of grandma's basement. Highly polished, very highly polished, very highly funded. And when you see the graphics and the perfection, let's put it that way, in what is being presented, it's very clearly a highly organized, highly orchestrated effort, and it's to bolster Avi Loeb. The whole point is to interpret comet data, and they're going out there and they're finding amazing information and posting it and then interpreting it as being spaceships. And what's interesting is some of my listeners got a hold of them and said, by the way, you know, what you're trying to write off here as spaceships is explainable by McCanney's computer comet model. And so, and no reply. The reply was pretty much, oh, well, we'll really look into it, and then nothing. Silence. The big silence, the big zero. And that tells you everything. So, yeah, they're trying to interpret all of this NASA data and related data. It's mainly, you know, it all comes out of NASA, the spacecraft, the space-based telescopes, etc., and ground-based telescopes. But anyway, I'll talk a little bit about that. A few weeks ago, I made a comment about the size of comets, and this is so important because people just really, no matter how many times I try and pound this home and just try and emphasize it, people still are not getting it. So a teaching technique, and some people will say, well, you already said this. I already heard this on your show. Well, those are exactly the people that need to hear it again. And it's a teaching technique that I learned when I spent about 10 years in the university classroom, physics, mathematics, computer science, and astronomy. Yes, I taught astronomy at the university level for a couple of years. But repeating something, if you want people, and these were college students, and I learned that I had to, the main points that I wanted to stick with them, I had to repeat it 3 times. And then the third time somebody say, you already said that. Hey, you're listening. You're one of the ones that heard it the first 2 times. Maybe, and maybe didn't understand it. But when I used to study now for students and professionals alike, people will read something one time and think, oh, okay, I read it. No, you didn't read it. You think you read it. You got some basic information, but you didn't really read it. you have to read things 3 times. And so when I would study for, say, physics and mathematics, I was in college, I had straight A's, physics, math, double major, and I was always weeks ahead of the lesson. So when I'd come into a lecture, it was something that I did 3 weeks ago. And so I was already, the wheels were already spinning. I was always already projecting into the future what was going on. And that's why I was at the top of my class in all of these, in those fields. I didn't do that great in other things like German. I was not an A German student, excuse me. And languages are not my thing. But reading things 3 times. So I would take a lesson plan or a book, textbook, whatever, something weeks in advance, and I would read it. Okay, I'd read it through once. Okay, close the book. And then I'd come back and I'd read it a second time. So the first time was very quick peripheral reading. The second time was a bit slower. The first time, you're catching new words, new phraseology, new maybe equations, whatever it was, okay. The second time is a little bit more detailed, but the third time was the charm. And that's when you went through and you read it and you started, make sure you did all the problems in the back of the book. And then I would try and put it into perspective, into physical reality, no matter what equation you're dealing with. You can observe it in a physical reality. So I would get a feeling for how stuff worked. And that's why I tend to be a good teacher now for the general public, because I can bring it down to your level. I know what you know and I know what you don't know. And so when I explain something like how a comet works, I know what your level of experience is, etc. For example, when I compared the Plasma Discharge Comet Model to a backyard bug killer, the zapper, it's a very good analogy, and it's something everybody is aware of. Something most people have seen, summer night, you're sitting there, you got the bug zapper going, zzz, 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 and the bugs are flying into it. Well, that's what's going on in the solar system, except on a grand, grand scale. Okay, but getting back to the main topic, the size of comets. The size of comets. So you have the physical size, and on my, right here, I have a diagram. I'll get my head out of the way. I've shown this many times before, and that's why I have it on this screen. It was a drawing I did in 1986 for a comet paper, Dynamics of a Small Comet, dealing with the visit to a comet of Giacobini-Zinner by the ISEE-3 satellite. It was a solar monitoring satellite operated out of Los Alamos and Goddard. The teams there were operating the satellite, and they moved it off to visit a comet. Very interesting. And so this picture was a diagram of what they should have expected and did, in fact, find at the comet. And I might mention they had the X-ray detectors turned off because NASA told them, you don't need those X-ray detectors. Comets don't have X-rays, they're little snowballs. Well, they would have discovered, and I was in contact with these people, James Farquhar, leader of the project, and the PIs, the principal investigators of the X-ray instrument on the spacecraft. I said, keep this thing on. There are X-rays to the sunward side of comets. And of course, they turned them off per NASA's recommendation. And 10 years later, literally 10 years later, X-rays in comets were discovered by accident. By the Rosette satellite team operating out of the European Space Agency. Okay, but size of comets. Now there's the physical size. Now if you look here, there's a diagram, and right in the center, right there, is the nucleus. So it's just, in this picture, it's just like a little dot. But it's discharging the solar capacitor, and all of the rest of the lines there are electron and proton currents and ion currents is part of the electrical discharge. So the physical size of the nucleus might be a mile across or 10 miles across or something, or it might be planet-sized. But the discharge of the solar capacitor can stretch across the entire solar system. So the physical size of the nucleus is very different from the electrical size. And that is why now I was on another radio show last night, Brent Johnson out of Los Angeles, and this topic came up again. And the people are the same question that Jeff Rentz posed a number of weeks ago to me in a private email. He said, how could this little comet so far away, it's almost at Jupiter, how could that affect Earth's weather? And so I explained that there are two measurements of the size of a comet. One is the physical size of the nucleus, and then there's the electrical size. Now, when this comet electrically started connecting with Jupiter's discharge of the solar capacitor, which is also hundreds of millions of miles long, that's what we connect into every 13 months or so to create what I call the Jupiter winds. The straight line winds that come every time we have an inferior conjunction with relative to Jupiter. We are to the inside of Jupiter, and we connect into that electron stream, and then we get the red auroras. That's where they come from. Okay, so electrical size, very different than the physical size of a comet. And I'll give you a little update now on 3I Atlas also. This comet is acting exactly like a plasma discharge comet should. The reason it has a pretty significant electrical discharge signature, being very long compared to an average little comet of its size, is because 3I Atlas is moving very fast. And so what happens is the faster it moves, the faster it breaks down the gradient of the electric field in the solar capacitor, and therefore has a very significant discharge. And so that's what they're measuring. This comet has had a sunward spike since it was officially discovered in early July of last year. Okay. So right now, 3I Atlas, the 28th, which was a couple days ago, Saturday, that was the official, what I designated as Born of Jupiter Day. Now, every morning about midnight on, I've been watching Jupiter, and I have a fairly good set of astronomical binoculars. And I didn't want to use anything bigger because my hope was that Comet 3I Atlas would become a much bigger comet, or even cause Jupiter to go comet, or maybe even to ignite Jupiter. Jupiter already has ongoing fusion in its atmosphere. So the point here is that there could be visible activity, visible to the naked eye, for 3I Atlas and Jupiter. But as of this morning, that has not happened yet. But it could happen because 3I Atlas is literally right now very close to Jupiter, the planet. And they call it the Hill radius. I called it, when I did my work on comets, I called the circle of equal force. And the Hill radius is somewhat of a very misconstrued concept. It's basically where the force of Jupiter is greater than that of the Sun. But I like to call it the circle of equal force because it has some very interesting properties, that the force vector on an object that is on the circle of equal force and surrounding this in a two-body system. So you have the Sun, you have Jupiter, and you have the circle at which the force of Jupiter is equal to that of the Sun. But when you look at the vector of force, that's the sum of the gravitational force of the Sun and Jupiter, or whatever, Saturn and the Sun or whatever, that force points towards the Lagrange point. It's a very interesting mathematical problem that I solved, and nobody had ever really noticed this before, but that's what gives the comet its characteristic shape. Now on this side over here you see a picture of Hale-Bopp. Look closely at the arms emanating out there, like spread out from the comet nucleus, and over here you see the drawing, the theoretical drawing of the field lines. And guess what? They're the same. You take one and lay it on top of the other one, and you see exactly the paths. Now, what you find on the Hale-Bopp picture is streamers. And if these pictures were taken by Ian Griffin, Griffin Observatory in Florida, and he had a series of these, so they put them together as a video, and these filaments are out there, and they're like waving around like snakes, or like maybe leeches on a fish or something, but they're following these field line patterns that you see up in this diagram. But what are they? Well, it's the photo was taken with what is known in astronomy as a Swan filter. So it's triply ionized oxygen and singly ionized hydrogen. So it's water, highly ionized water is what you're seeing in that picture. And so it's a very interesting photograph. When you take a photograph of a comet with any other wavelength or broad spectrum detector camera, you don't see that detail. And what is going on right here is you have huge amounts of water coming into the nucleus of Hale-Bopp. It's growing, and water is very heavy. So that's why the orbit of Hale-Bopp was changing very rapidly on a daily basis. Okay, so the 3i Atlas right now is approaching Jupiter, and we don't know how big the nucleus is because NASA is not releasing the data. The way you determine the size of a nucleus of a comet is you take a radio telescope, you send out a beam, and then look at the reflected beam coming back. And that tells you literally up to the closest inch the size of a comet nucleus. Okay, so, but here's the deal with 3i Atlas at Jupiter. It's having a significant gravitational encounter, and we don't know because NASA has hidden the data, the ephemeris orbital element data for that comet. It has hidden it, and we don't have a method of therefore calculating. And there are online simulators, good simulators available for the public that would factor in all of the forces, but especially that of Jupiter, which it's very close to. It would one would be able to calculate where Jupiter is going to throw it to, but we don't have that data because NASA is hiding it. And it's available, but the only thing we have is the original estimate of its orbit from calculated back in July, and that's no longer valid because the tail drag was slowing the comet down as it moved in towards the sun, and then sped it up, accelerated it as it went out away from the sun. And so we really don't know where it's going to end up or how it's going to interact with Jupiter. And that's going on right now. So that is the big announcement of the night, of the week, of the month, and maybe of the century. But we don't know what the result. Okay, now we're going to tell you a little bit about what you should be watching. This is a little project. You can start actually when the sun goes down. Find Jupiter, get a star chart, find Jupiter, and watch it traverse the sky. Now, the moon was interfering over the past week from about the 25th of February up until today. The moon was, in fact, one night it was right next to Jupiter. But that has passed. Now the moon, although it's going to be full, is not going to be a big issue because you can see Jupiter quite clearly in the night sky and separate. So but what I would encourage people to do is if you have small binoculars, that would be the best thing. And then also have them on. Don't try and hand hold the binoculars. Have them on a tripod so that you can, so they're steady, because otherwise the Jupiter will just look like this little ball moving around. You should also be able to, when you're in focus, you should be able to see the 4 moons of Jupiter. And they will be on a line across the equator of Jupiter. So if you can see the moons, you're in good focus. That's what you should make sure your binoculars are focused sufficient that you can see the 4 moons of Jupiter. And you may only see 2 or 3 at a time because one of them might be aligned with Jupiter or behind Jupiter. But over the various nights, you should be able to see the 4 various moons, the big moons of Jupiter. And that's the key that you're in focus now. 3i Atlas has moved past Jupiter along the ecliptic. And so, and if you're looking, say, anywhere in the United States, if you look up, that will be an angle. The ecliptic will be at an angle, about 23 degrees from vertical. Okay. So at any rate, watch for 3i Atlas coming out the other side of Jupiter and expanding greatly in brightness. Now, if it does, and we see it by Jupiter, that would be quite the deal. But nobody is reporting. Like I said, all of the amateurs have gone silent. Now, this is a comet that easily would be captured on amateur equipment, amateur telescopes. And they've all gone silent. So just amazing how they can shadow ban, like this show, for example, should have, 500,000 viewers every week. It was going to that point when it got, let's say, pulled from the New York studio, that it was growing by leaps and bounds, and literally was having 250,000 views per episode. And all of a sudden, boom, was gone, and now it cannot grow. It's just being shadow banned completely. So they have the ability to do this, and amazingly, a comet like this would have thousands of amateurs taking pictures and posting them, but nothing, not a single one. And the few people that had YouTube channels that were posting photographs, etc., they're just gone. Additionally, NASA has a huge amount of equipment that all of these special projects and radio telescopes and the Webb telescope and the Hubble, all of them are taking extensive amounts of data, and it's all hidden actually in the CIA. It's being hidden above top level to the point where they cannot even admit they have data. And NASA, the actual Tier 2 scientists, the lowlifes at NASA, and I don't say that in a derogatory sense towards those people, but literally they are, and most of them have no clue that there's an entire layer of science above them, of which they know nothing. They might have a little bit of an inkling. I'll give an example. I've mentioned this before. I was at an American Geophysical Union meeting. It was, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, I forget. And it was about solar physics, which is typically, that's one of my specialties when I go to American Geophysical Union meetings. And the SPA, the solar physics discussion groups, etc. Imagine American Geophysical Union meeting is about 20,000 scientists from around the world that converge 2 times a year. So anyway, I'm in the audience listening to a guy talk about his solar research using some of the NASA-funded equipment, etc. And at the end, he goes, part of the report is we send our data and our findings, analysis, everything up to this group, kind of an invisible group he couldn't really say who it was. It was just that part of his contract and fulfilling his contract for the funding that they get to do this. Part of that was to send up all of their information, findings, analysis, everything to this group, which was clearly a tier 1 group. That's what he was talking about. And so then he just left it. And after the talk, somebody raised their hand and said, "Hey, what'd they tell you about your work? Would they say it was good or bad, or did they agree with you, or what'd they say?" And he goes, "Oh, they never respond to us." In other words, yeah, you got to send all your data and everything up to those people. And if it's something good, they keep it. If it's not, which is a lot of times the case, because they're interpreting it according to old norms, old theoretical work. And so the tier 1 groups get all the data. And where does that go? And literally, it's owned by the world banking system. That's what's going on. And so, okay, as long as I bring that topic up, I typically don't get into politics, or what one might call politics, but this is not politics. What's going on right now with the disclosure movement, they're trying to push Trump to admit that there is vast amounts of data for what they call UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. In other words, stuff, which used to be unidentified flying objects, but now it's like phenomenon. They kind of like broadened it, the terminology, to include other stuff, because now you have drones, etc. Anyway, they were trying to get Trump to go up to the podium and say, "Yeah, we got all this data," and now supposedly it's all disappeared. And they moved this up from June. It was supposed to be in June, and they now want Trump to do this now. Well, this corresponds with the early attacks. You have Venezuela, now you have Iran. And I saw an interview with Catherine Austin Fitts. I believe that's her name, proper name. But she was a senator. I don't know if she's still a senator or not. She is a person that's very aware of what's going on, like the level of Robert David Steele or people like that. And so anyway, she was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And Tucker and her were discussing the recent milieu with Iran. And she said her analysis is that this is related to the countries that are not conforming to the international banking system. Like, in other words, the BRICS nations. And then Iran is a big one. And you might ask the question, well, why don't they attack Cuba? Well, Cuba doesn't have natural resources, doesn't have oil, doesn't have huge deposits of minerals or other items that are in high demand for security reasons, etc. Cuba has organic honey they're selling on the international market, but that's not a big ticket item when you're dealing with international banking. So Cuba is kind of like, it's a dot in the ocean out there, and who cares? They got some palm trees, and occasionally they have a hurricane. So nobody's really worried about Cuba, even though they're probably more independent, you might say, of the world banking, of world banks. The World Bank, they're more independent than Venezuela was. But Venezuela had oil and has other minerals and other things that were deemed as necessary, let's put it this way, to force them into the one world government. So then that's the ticket right here, and that's the whole issue with 3i Atlas. And the outfit that we uncovered this past week, I'm not going to say a name, I'm not going to give them any fame, but it's a very highly polished web page with high analysis, very good graphics, impeccable English and analysis, and then with the ultimate statement that Comet 3i Atlas is a spacecraft and supporting Avi Loeb. And that's a very essential part of this whole dog and pony show to bring in the new world, the one world government. And we know that from the Wernher von Braun. Before he died, he released information. He said there's going to be 4 steps that have to be accomplished before the New World Order is ushered in. And now you have the Larry Ellisons with the Palantir, the security state with cameras everywhere, where everybody will be doing good, because if you do anything wrong, you'll be immediately tried. There will be no judge and jury because it's all on camera, including, I suppose, when you go pee in the bathroom. Everybody, there are going to be cameras everywhere, according to Larry Ellison, all operated by AI. Isn't that going to be swell? According to those people, that's the best thing since sliced bread. Okay, so that's what's going on right now. And so the movement in Iran is not about regime change or bringing democracy to the poor people there. Excuse me. Those are the excuses, and it sounds pretty good. But the real reason is that they're bringing these countries in under the umbrella of the One World Bank, the One World Government, and the Rothschild banking system, operated out of Rome. It's very clear if you know what's going on. And it's the 4th stage that Wernher von Braun talked about was the false flag alien invasion. And so you have Pete Hegseth going around pouring billions of dollars into Iron Dome space shield against aliens. And then you've got the disclosure movement going, if they only disclose this information, we'll have infinite energy and free energy, and life will become like a charm, and there won't be any more wars, there won't be any more problems. And those are the 2 controlled opposites. And so that is the importance of maintaining the dirty snowball comet model and completely obfuscating the real reason comets work the way they do. And comets, by the way, are at the center of many, many things. Now, when you look at what you might call the dark side, they are control freaks. And this is something I learned a long time ago. I finally figured it out. I thought that, they didn't want the real reason for comets or the real theoretical work on how the sun works, etc. Just because scientists had egos and they had this history of theoretical work that they didn't want botched. No, this comes from top down. And so when you find the things that are allowed to be talked about, especially at Tier 2, Tier 3 level, the Neil deGrasse Tyson levels, or the Carl Sagan levels, Tier 3, or the Tier 2 level, the university professors or people like Avi Loeb, it's a very controlled message, and that is because comets are central and have been central to many historical events. And so it also turns out that, interestingly enough, that comets, this electrical discharge that passes through the comet, is also what you use with electromagnetic propulsion systems. If you want to go to another star, or if you're an alien coming from another star and coming into our solar system, you would tend to use the comet electrical discharge as a braking mechanism using electromagnetic propulsion systems. So there's so many things tied in here to this so-called alien issue. And let me just make it very clear. People that are looking for disclosure, looking for information from the government, believing the government is hiding information or has vast amounts of stored information, they are not going to release any real information to the public. It's just not going to happen. They make some phony releases just like other things recently where they have all of this, they're harboring all of this information, and it's going to be next week, and we're going to have this huge release of information, and on and on and on. And it just doesn't happen. It never comes to pass. And all the people are like, well, you said then. And then they go, oh, well, now it'll be in 2 weeks, and we'll really have everything. And 2 weeks pass, and you go, well, wait a minute, 2 weeks passed, and you said now you're going to release this information. Nope, it doesn't come out. And then the next, it goes on and on and on. Yep. And that's what's going to go on with this disclosure dog and pony show. That it's just going to keep going on and on. Okay, so enough of that. But the amount of well-polished misinformation coming out is staggering. And they've moved this up. My estimate is that they're very paranoid, that if they wait into early summer, that something is going to happen that is going to prevent them. Okay, now I'm going to give you 2 examples of where data is being fudged, and this is to cover up the standard theories, one of them being the Big Bang and the other one being the dirty snowball comet model, which are both patently false. If nobody in the real world of science believes these anymore, but what you have are the core groups of scientists who've made their living, a very handsome living, off of propounding these 2 theories. And so they have to maintain them at any cost. So there is this, this top-down control of these ideas to maintain them, so it keeps the public stupid. But the other part is that these scientists are really grappling for anything they can do, hiding data, obfuscating data, sweeping it under the rug, whatever it takes, changing data, changing the goalposts, the measurement goalposts, etc., standard techniques. Okay, so the first one has to do with an article that came out of Space Daily, and it's talking about dusty early galaxies. And so anyway, the James Webb Telescope comes along and is much more powerful than the Hubble Space Telescope. So there's regions of the sky that were just black. There was nothing there with the Hubble Space Telescope. And James Webb Telescope is able to see them and see galaxies. So what it has detected are what they're calling dusty galaxies that are literally sitting on top of the Big Bang. In other words, how did the standard story for the Big Bang is that the explosion occurred, and then this kind of 3-dimensional window occurs in which matter is blowing outwards and in its primitive form, and then eventually charged particles and other types of subatomic particles form. Then you have the protons and the electrons and the type of particles we see today. Then the chemistry begins magically, and all of this progresses to the point where you have people driving SUVs up and down the road, biological evolution, etc. And all of this happened just by chance, which is not the way things work. How come protons on the other side of the universe have the same properties as protons here, or diamonds or anything else? That's the point of my book, The Diamond Principle. Okay, so the end result is that the James Webb Telescope is seeing these galaxies at a position which is too close to the Big Bang, like 500 million years, 500 million with an M, years after the 13.5 billion year ago, allegedly, the Big Bang. So what they do is what they've always done. They create some kind of fairy tale. Oh, well, if this happened and this happened, then time would change. And, it's just a hocus pocus to keep the Big Bang people in their offices. Because if not, they would be ridiculed. They'd be all working at McDonald's hamburger stand because they've got PhDs. Imagine having a PhD in something that's totally false, totally bogus, and you have all the equations, all the published articles, peer review, all of the fame, all of the textbooks, and it's completely completely wrong. What is your PhD worth? Well, you got to maintain that value. You put all that time into it. That's your paycheck. That's your ticket to pay, making the house payment and sending the kids to college and eventually retiring in Arizona playing golf. And so they have to maintain it. That is something that the one concept which has been thoroughly disproven by recent data, and for which the data has been basically sidetracked to where they come up with these other ideas, band-aids, to try and make it work. The second one is recently a number of major observatories have seen that the light from the comet nucleus and the light from the comet tail are not commensurate. In other words, the amount of material being generated off the nucleus should equal the amount of material in the tail of the comet, and it's not true. In all cases, they are measuring more material in the tail than around the nucleus. And of course, that can't be if the material is coming off the nucleus. But the interesting thing here is then people are going, oh, well, it's a spaceship. And that's what's going on. It's kind of like a jet engine. It's drawing in a lot of air and then heating it up and sending it out the back end, creating these jets. That's what some people are saying. And I reported on that just a little earlier. This is like part of the dog and pony show, where NASA goes, oh, not a problem, we can explain that, and they find various, they spend more time trying to figure out why the data doesn't fit their model than vice versa. Anyway, the end result is that comets are now measured to have much more material in the tail than comes from the nucleus. And the end result, oh, it's a spaceship. I tell you, the baloney that's being fed to you people in the public is just monstrous. Okay, one quick announcement here. The radio show that airs on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time from WWCR in Nashville, Tennessee, is going on to the summertime frequency on the March 12th show. So that will be 9.350 megahertz from shortwave. And so changing to the summertime frequency once again, 9.350. And that'll run until next, is it October, November, whenever we switch over to wintertime. And it goes along with daylight saving time. So the actual station switch will occur on March 8th, but the first show that'll affect my show will be March 12th, and the James McCanny Science Hour at the Crossroads will be on 9.350 megahertz starting March 12th. I want to go into a little more depth on this idea of the New World Order government, etc., coming in, being moved up from June. All of this activity was going to take place in June. It's now being moved up to really right now, because it's very clear that the people who are in charge of making this happen, they're very paranoid people, and they have a real reason to be, because there's a worldwide sentiment that is waking up, and I'm not going to go into detail on that other than just noting that there is one. And so anyway, the people who are in control are very paranoid people. They've been working on this for literally, in a sense, hundreds of years, and certainly the better part of a century, coming down to the point where the entire world can be under a one world umbrella of control. And there are essential things that were not there before: the AI, the ability to monitor, the remote sensing that's necessary for in the vast amount of databases that are needed, the data centers, to keep all the information on everybody. It's really an extensive thing, but with all of this and all of their best planning, there's one thing that they know they cannot cover, and that is, now you can imagine that all things on planet Earth can be controlled, including weather, including if it's going to rain or not, including all kinds of things that they have control. But the one thing they cannot control, and the one thing they know that you will figure out that they have no control over, is things from outer space. They even have people convinced that if we build spacecraft and space shields and lasers, we're somehow going to have the ability to fend off from alien invasions. And it's just, that's got to be the most bizarre thing. There's an old expression, don't take a knife to a gunfight. And it's kind of a funny way of explaining what's going on. If people think that we, in our primitive state of going into outer space, still using rockets, good grief, inertial propulsion systems, basically rockets carrying all this fuel along and heating it up and jetting it out of the back end of a nozzle, that's somehow the way to go in and move around in outer space. Absolutely absurd. But you think that this civilization that comes up with this, that this technology, that this civilization somehow has the ability to fend off and fight aliens? Excuse me, boys and girls. I mean, if they wanted to destroy us, they could have a long time ago. There's all kinds of ways of doing that, by diverting asteroids to crash into Earth, or using solar power for lasers, or I mean, these are civilizations that might be millions of years old, and have technology that we never imagined. And we're, like I say, don't take a knife to a gunfight. But the facade, let me just put it that way, the facade that's being laid down is that somehow we have the ability to do this, and they're pulling a lot of money into it. But the one thing, and it is a facade, because nobody in their right mind would imagine that if there were really aliens coming with a big starship, that they couldn't just blow this planet Earth out of the sky in a matter of New York seconds, and that'd be the end of it. Sorry. But the thing they're really afraid of is you, the public, finding out that they don't have control over other things out there, especially physical things, especially large comets. And so why is that relevant? Because in the end days, and this comes from many prophets, not the least of which was a guy named Jesus Christ, talks about the end days. And he says, what does he say? He says, look up in the sky, you'll see the signs in the heavens, and there will be rumors of war, all of the things that are going on all the time. That's the part where he's talking about rumors of war, etc. But look up in the sky, when the stars will seem to fall from the sky. What he's describing here is a comet. And the firmament will be shaken. That's the gravitational wave of a passing comet. And if they can convince you, like they convinced the Middle Ages people that the Earth was flat, if they can convince you that comets are these little teeny things that can mean no harm to anybody, occasionally, long time ago for the dinosaurs, one crashed into Earth, they say, and created the worldwide devastation of dinosaurs. But, oh, gee, don't worry about that. Couldn't happen now because that was millions of years ago. 64 million, out of sight, out of mind. So the one thing they are deathly afraid of is that when you look up in the sky, you go, hey, that's a big raging comet there, and that ain't no little snowball, and those leaders over there, those bankers, don't have any control over this. That's what they're afraid of. That's the message they do not want you to hear. The Challenger space shuttle explosion, where allegedly 7 people died because they crashed into the ocean because NASA forgot to give them a parachute. Excuse me. But one of them being a teacher, this woman teacher, And that day, every kid in the world was looking at that launch. And it blows up, and gee, what message does that send the kids? That sends a message that only NASA can go into space, and it's really dangerous, and you can't do it, and on and on and on. And that's a control mechanism. It's just like the flat earthers, where the people teaching that from the pulpit in the Middle Ages knew very well that the earth was round, that the earth was not flat, but they taught the flat earth to the peasants to keep them under a mind control, and that's what the dirty snowball comet model is doing today. And literally because they are deathly afraid that you would find out that those things can be big, they can do this kind of damage, and that's the symbol of the coming of the end. The coming of the end, and a large comet. And Hale-Bopp could have been that. Hale-Bopp could have been that large comet that devastated Earth. Okay, so just a quick other mention about Hale-Bopp. When it was originally discovered, it was in 1989 to 91. Robert Harrington of the Naval Observatory saw the nucleus, what was to become the nucleus of Hale-Bopp, in a planet. And this was basically an Earth-sized planet. And it finally was officially discovered July 15th in 1995. I believe it was, 1995. And but the nucleus was planet-sized, and NASA goes, oh, it's huge, it's 40 miles across. Complete fabrication of information, pawning it off on the public. But there again, why did they do that? Because they're deathly afraid of the public knowing this and passing it on to the kids and being taught in the schools. And the idea that a big comet could come through the solar system and wreak havoc on Earth, people would maybe stop paying their mortgage, their insurance, their local taxes, or whatever. I'm not encouraging any of that, but that's potentially what could happen if people found out that comets were actually something different than this fluffy little snowball thing. So they have to maintain that facade to keep the people fooled. Okay, so I want to end by talking a little bit about the water filtration issues. And here's something that most people don't understand, that when your city water, when they do testing, they do this monthly to test the water in the city water supply. They use what are known as federal standards. As federal standards have been etched into law in a lot of cases decades ago. And so they don't really have an up-to-date list of what's in your water and what they should be testing for. So the city will tell you, oh, we comply with federal standards, which is pretty weak. The federal standards are very, very poor. And they don't include all of the toxins that are in your water. So a lot of people are drinking highly toxic water and showering in it, etc. So what I want to mention is that if you go to the webpage, J. McCanney Science webpage, you can link there, or the JMCC water filters webpage that goes directly to the water filter page. The MR5, the whole house water filter, is currently on sale, and typically they're $14.99. Right now it's $10.99 for the package. That's the MR5 whole house water filter and the UV sterilizer. It comes with the first set of filter elements, and the UV sterilizer comes with the first 2 years worth of bulbs. And so once again, go to the webpage, jmccwaterfilters.com. Also, we have the replacement filter elements for the gravity water filters. So they come in a 4, an 8, or a 12 pack, and they're discounted also. So go there, go to the jmccwaterfilters.com webpage and stock up today. Most people today are using bottled water. It's really common, and they're spending a lot of money on that. So a family of 4 could literally pay for the installation and have really clean water in your home for drinking, for cooking, for showering, for laundry, and pay for their system within a single year just by taking your own water from home. And when you go out and buy bottled water, it's typically just tap water, very bad for you. And then if it sat in the sun or froze, those thin plastic bottles, leaching chemicals, cancer-causing chemicals into the water. So once again, webpage jmccwaterfilters.com, and the main webpage jmccsci.com. We'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanny. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,